Because I refused to sign over my lake house to my grandson Colton, he threw my medications across the kitchen and screamed that I was selfish and ungrateful. "After everything we've done for you, Grandma, you're just going to hoard your wealth while we struggle?" Those words cut deeper than any knife could. That's when I realized the grandchildren I'd helped raise had been using me all along. The day had started so peacefully. Spring sunshine streamed through my kitchen windows, casting a warm glow across the worn oak table where I'd served countless family meals over the decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I hummed quietly as I arranged fresh-cut daffodils, the first from my garden this year, in the blue ceramic vase my late husband Buck had given me on our 35th anniversary. I'd been looking forward to this visit from Colton and his wife Beatrice. They rarely came by anymore unless they needed something, but I tried not to dwell on that thought. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps today they simply wanted to spend time with their 76-year-old grandmother. I'd baked Colton's favorite blueberry crumble and prepared Beatrice's preferred herbal tea, hoping these small gestures might bridge the growing distance between us. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my apron and patted my silver hair before answering. Colton stood on the porch, tall and handsome in his expensive golf shirt, Beatrice beside him in designer sunglasses. Neither was smiling. "Grandma," Colton said, brushing past me with a quick, obligatory kiss on my cheek. His cologne was overwhelming. "Place looks the same as always." I couldn't tell if that was criticism or observation. "Well, come in, I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I've made tea and blueberry crumble." "We can't stay long," Beatrice said, checking her watch before they'd even sat down. She didn't remove her sunglasses. "We have an appointment with a real estate agent at 3. My heart sank a little, but I nodded and served them anyway, my arthritis making my movements slower than I'd like. Neither offered to help. "Real estate agent?" I asked, settling carefully into my chair. "Are you two thinking of moving?" Colton exchanged a significant look with Beatrice before clearing his throat. "Actually, Grandma, that's sort of why we're here." I waited, my teacup halfway to my lips. "We've found the perfect house in Rosewood Hills," Beatrice said, her voice suddenly animated. 5 bedrooms, pool, excellent school district for when we have children. Everything we've dreamed of." "That sounds lovely," I said, genuinely pleased. For them. Colton had always talked about wanting a big family someday. "The thing is," Colton continued, setting down his untouched crumble, "we need a bit of help with the down payment." There it was. I set my teacup down carefully, the fragile china clinking against the saucer. "I see. We've been pre-approved. For the mortgage," Beatrice added quickly, "but property values have skyrocketed and 20% down is just—" She made a gesture toward the ceiling. "How much would you need?" I asked, though a sense of foreboding was already settling in my chest. I'd helped Colton through college, given him money for his first car, loaned him funds when he and Beatrice wanted a lavish wedding. Much of that money had never been repaid despite promises. Colton named a figure that made me blink. "That's substantial," I said carefully. "Well," we thought, "instead of giving us the money outright, you could sign over the lake house to us," Colton said. "It's just sitting there most of the year anyway. We could sell it and use the proceeds for our down payment." The lake house. The small, weathered cabin Buck and I had purchased 40 years ago with our life savings, where we'd spent every summer, where we'd taught Colton and his siblings to swim and fish, where Buck had spent his final days watching the sunset over the water he loved. "The lake house isn't for sale," I said quietly. "Come on, Grandma," Colton pressed, leaning forward. "You can barely drive out there anymore. When was the last time you even went? It's going to waste." "I was there 3 weeks ago," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Austin drove me up for the weekend." Austin was my youngest grandson, the only one who visited regularly without asking for anything. He'd drive 2 hours just to take me to lunch or help with yard work. Austin? Beatrice repeated with a slight eye roll. Of course. I frowned at her tone. What does that mean? Nothing, Colton cut in. Look, Grandma, be practical. You're not getting any younger. The lake house is worth a lot more now than when you and Grandpa bought it. It makes sense to liquidate it while the market's hot. The lake house stays in the family, I said firmly. That was Buck's wish, and mine as well. When I'm gone, it will be shared among all the grandchildren, as our will states. That could be years from now, Beatrice muttered, not quite under her breath. A chill ran through me at her words. Did she resent my continued existence? Was I just an obstacle to my own property in her eyes? I'm sorry, I said, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. I can't help you with this. Perhaps a smaller house for now, or... A smaller house? Colton interrupted, his voice rising. In what universe do you think Beatrice and I would settle for less than we deserve? Do you have any idea how hard we work? How much pressure we're under? I understand pressure, I said softly, thinking of the years I'd worked 2 jobs after Buck's first heart attack, how we'd scraped by on my teacher's salary while raising our children. But Colton wasn't interested in my experiences. No, you don't, he said, standing abruptly. You've had it easy. This big house paid off, the lake property, your investments, and now you're just sitting on all of it while your family struggles. Colton, I began, shocked by his characterization of my life, but he was already pacing the kitchen, agitated. It's not fair, he continued. Claire and Patsy's kids already got help with their houses. What about us? Don't we matter to you? My daughters. Claire and Patsy had never asked me for money for their children's homes. I had offered small gifts when they bought their modest first houses, nothing like what Colton was demanding. That's not true, and you know it, I said, my voice hardening slightly. I've helped you all equally over the years. Equally? Colton scoffed, his handsome face contorting. You've always favored Austin. Everyone knows it. That's not... Just admit it, he snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. The vase of daffodils toppled, water spilling across the tile. Neither Colton nor Beatrice moved to help as I struggled to my feet to clean up the mess. As I bent painfully to retrieve the fallen flowers, I noticed my pill organizer on the counter. I took several medications for my heart condition and arthritis, carefully sorted each Sunday into the daily compartments. I won't sign over the lake house, I said as I straightened, daffodils dripping in my hand. That's final. Colton's face darkened. In one swift movement, he grabbed my pill organizer and hurled it across the kitchen. Plastic compartments burst open, pills scattering across the floor like tiny, vital confetti. Colton, I gasped, shocked by the violence of the gesture. After everything we've done for you, Grandma, he shouted, his voice unfamiliar with rage. You're just going to hoard your wealth while we struggle? I stared at my grandson, suddenly seeing not the boy I'd loved, but a stranger consumed by entitlement and greed. A cold clarity washed over me as I looked at my scattered medications, some crushed under Beatrice's expensive heel as she stood by silently, making no move to intervene. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Beatrice finally spoke. Let's go, Colton. She's obviously not going to be reasonable. As they stormed out, neither looked back at the mess they'd left, physical and emotional. The front door slammed with such force that one of the family photos fell from the wall, its frame cracking against the hardwood floor. In the sudden silence, I carefully lowered myself to my knees and began gathering my pills, tears blurring. My vision. Some of these medications kept my heart beating properly. Colton knew that. That's when I knew. The grandchildren I'd helped raise, whom I'd loved unconditionally, had been using me all along. And somewhere along the way, my love had become nothing more than a resource to be exploited. my very existence an inconvenience to their financial ambitions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I picked up the shattered frame, I looked at the family photo inside. Colton's college graduation, all of us smiling proudly. Something hardened in my heart then, a resolution taking shape through the hurt and betrayal. If my grandchildren only valued me for my money, then perhaps it was time they learned exactly what that meant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Colton's outburst, the scattered pills, Beatrice's cold indifference. My hands trembled as I sipped chamomile tea in my darkened kitchen, moonlight casting long shadows across the floor I'd scrubbed clean of the earlier confrontation. The phone rang at 10:30 p.m., startling me from my thoughts. It was my daughter Claire. "Mom? Colton just called me," she began without preamble. "He's very upset." I gripped the phone tighter. "Is that so?" "He says you refused to help them with their house. That you were—" She hesitated. "Difficult. Difficult," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "Is that what he calls it when he throws an elderly woman's heart medication across the room?" Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm sure he didn't mean to." "He meant exactly what he did, Claire," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your son came here demanding I sign over the lake house so he could sell it for his down payment. When I refused, he had a tantrum that could have seriously harmed me." "The lake house?" Claire sounded genuinely surprised. "But that's been in the family for decades. That's where Dad—" "Yes," I said quietly. "Where your father spent his last summer. Where your children learned to swim. Apparently, that means nothing compared to Colton and Beatrice's desire for a 5-bedroom home in Rosewood Hills." Claire sighed heavily. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'll talk to him. But you know how they've struggled to save—" Struggled? The word broke something loose inside me. "Last month, Beatrice posted photos of their trip to Belize. Colton drives a car that cost more than your father and I paid for our first house. They eat at restaurants where the entrees cost what I spend on groceries for a week. What exactly about their lifestyle suggests struggle to you?" "It's complicated, Mom. The economy is different now. Housing costs have—" "Do not lecture me about economics, Claire Elizabeth," I said, using her middle name as I had when she was a child in trouble. "I lived through recession and inflation. Your father and I saved for 20 years to buy that lake house. We drove used cars and clipped coupons and worked overtime. We didn't demand that someone else hand over their property because we wanted more than we could afford." Another sigh. "Look, can we talk about this tomorrow, when everyone's calmer? I'm sure Colton feels terrible about what happened." "Has he called to apologize?" I asked. Silence. "That's what I thought," I continued. "Claire, I need you to understand something. I love my grandchildren, I always have, but I will not be treated this way, not by Colton, not by anyone." "Of course not, Mom. No one should be treated disrespectfully, but families have disagreements. We can work through this." I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling every one of my 76 years. There's a difference between a disagreement and what happened today. Your son showed me exactly who he is and what he thinks of me. And frankly, it's made me reconsider a great many things. What does that mean? Claire's voice sharpened with alarm. It means I have some thinking to do, I said. Good night, Claire. I hung up before she could respond, something I'd never done before. My hand shook as I set the phone down. I wasn't accustomed to standing my ground with my children. Buck had always been the firm one, the boundary setter. I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over. But Buck wasn't here anymore. It was just me now. The next morning, Claire arrived unannounced, her expression a careful blend of concern and appeasement. She brought fresh bagels and my favorite orange marmalade. as though breakfast offerings could erase what had transpired. "Mom," she began, setting coffee before me. "I spoke with Colton. He admits he lost his temper, but he was just disappointed. You know how much that house in Rosewood Hills means to them. And you know how much the lake house meant to your father," I replied, leaving the coffee untouched. "To all of us once." Claire had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Of course it's special. No one's denying that. But practically speaking, you could get a very good price for it right now." "The lake house isn't for sale," I repeated, the same words I'd said to Colton. "Not to strangers, and not to family." Claire studied me for a moment. "This isn't like you, Mom. You've always been so generous, so willing to help." "And how has that generosity been repaid?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time Colton visited without asking for something? When did Beatrice last call just to check on me? Even you, Claire. Would you be sitting here now if Colton hadn't called you? Complaining last night?" A flush crept up her neck. "That's not fair. We're all busy. The kids have their lives, I have the gallery. We can't be here every day." "I'm not asking for every day," I said. "I'm asking for basic respect, for being treated as a person, not a bank." "No one thinks of you as a bank," Claire protested, but her eyes slid away from mine. "2 months ago," I said, "I fell in the garden and couldn't get up for nearly an hour. It was Austin who found me. Austin who stops by every week without fail, who calls just to chat, who remembers my birthday without a reminder from you. Where was Colton then? Or Patsy's daughter Annabelle, who only calls when she needs money, for those ridiculous business ventures of hers?" "Mom, that's not—" "Last Christmas," I continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. "I sat alone in this house while you all celebrated at Patsy's. It's too difficult to move all the presents, you said. Next year we'll do it at your place." It was the same excuse as the year before. Claire looked stricken. "We invited you. You could have come." "I have arthritis, Claire. I can't drive at night anymore, and none of you offered to pick me up." Austin was visiting his father's family in Oregon, so I spent Christmas alone looking at photos of all of you opening the gifts I'd carefully chosen and wrapped myself. Tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. Not now. "I didn't know," Claire whispered. "You didn't ask," I replied. "None of you ever ask. You just assume I'm fine until you need something from me." Claire reached for my hand, but I gently pulled away. "I've made a decision," I said. "I'm calling my lawyer today. I'm changing my will." Claire's face went pale. "Mom, don't be hasty. If this is about Colton, we can—" "This is about all of you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This is about years of being taken for granted, of being valued only for what I can give, not for who I am." "That's not true," Claire insisted, but there was panic in her eyes now. "We love you." "Perhaps you do," I acknowledged. "In your way. But love without respect, without reciprocity, that's not enough anymore." Claire left shortly after, her bagels untouched, promising to talk to Colton and Patsy about making more of an effort. I didn't believe her. Not anymore. After she left, I called Alden, my lawyer of 30 years, and scheduled an appointment for the following day. Then I picked up the phone again and dialed Austin. "Grandma?" His warm voice immediately soothed something raw inside me. "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" For the first time in days, I smiled. "I'm finding my strength, dear, and I could use your help with something important." When Austin arrived the next morning, I was already waiting on the porch, my grandmother's pearls around my neck and my old leather handbag packed with the necessary documents. His face broke into a wide smile as he bounded up the steps, planting a kiss on my cheek that wasn't hurried or obligatory but genuine. "You look nice, Grandma," he said, helping me to my feet. "Big plans today?" "We're going to see Alden," I told him, accepting his steadying arm. My lawyer. Austin's eyebrows rose slightly, but he asked no questions as he helped me to his car, adjusted my seat for comfort, and made sure my seatbelt was secure before closing the door. These small courtesies, once common, now seemed remarkable by their rarity. As we drove, I gazed out at the town that had been my home for over 50 years. Past the elementary school where I'd taught for 3 decades, the park where I'd pushed my grandchildren on swings, the church where Buck and I had renewed our vows on our 40th anniversary. Memories layered upon memories, a life built with care and dedication. How are things at the university? I asked Austin, who was finishing his doctorate in environmental science. He lit up immediately, telling me about his research, his students, his hopes for securing a position after graduation. Unlike my other grandchildren, Austin never complained about money. He lived simply in a small apartment, drove a modest used car, and seemed genuinely content. What about you, Grandma? He asked as we neared Alden's office. Claire called me. Last night. She seemed upset. I looked at my youngest grandson's profile, so like his grandfather's, the same determined chin, the same kind eyes. Did she tell you what happened with Colton? Austin's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Some of it. She said he lost his temper at your house, that there was a disagreement about the lake property. He threw my medication across the room, I said quietly. My heart pills, Austin, because I wouldn't give him what he wanted. Austin's face darkened in a way I'd never seen before. He did what? He pulled the car over suddenly, turning to face me fully. Are you all right? Did you get all your medication? Do you need to see Dr. Milligan? His immediate concern for my well-being, rather than for Colton's disappointment or the family politics, struck me profoundly. This, I realized, was what love actually looked like. I'm fine, I assured him, patting his hand. I gathered everything up. But it was illuminating. Illuminating, Austin repeated, his voice tight. Grandma, that's not just inappropriate, it's dangerous. He could have… I know, I interrupted gently. And that's why we're going to see Alden today. Austin fell silent, understanding dawning in his eyes. Without another word, he pulled back onto the road. Alden Montgomery had been our family lawyer since before Austin was born. His office was unchanged since Buck's days. The same worn leather chairs, the same oak desk, even the same ancient fern in the corner that somehow never died. The only concession to modernity was the sleek computer, where once a typewriter had sat. Annabelle. Alden greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. He was in his 60s now, his hair more salt than pepper, but his handshake was still firm, his blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. And young Austin, good to see you. Both. Once we were settled with cups of tea, Alden remembering without asking that I preferred mine with lemon, no sugar, I explained my purpose. I want to change my will, Alden, I said directly, significantly. If Alden was surprised, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and retrieved my file from a drawer. I have your current will here, the one you and Buck drafted after he became ill. Primary residence, investments, and personal effects divided equally among your children, with the lake property to be shared by all grandchildren, and a stipulation that it not be sold for at least 10 years after your passing. Yes, I nodded. That's the one we need to change. Austin sat quietly beside me, his expression supportive but neutral. He hadn't asked why I'd brought him, hadn't questioned my intentions. His trust in me was complete. What changes did you have in mind? Alden asked, pen poised over a legal pad. I took a deep breath. What I was about to do went against everything Buck and I had planned, everything we had believed in about treating our children equally, about family harmony. But circumstances had changed. I had changed. I want to establish a trust, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. The primary residence will go into it, along with all investments and insurance proceeds. Alden nodded, writing. And the beneficiaries of this trust? That's where things get complicated, I said. I want conditions. Alden's eyebrows rose slightly. What sort of conditions? The money and property will be distributed based on time spent with me in my remaining years, I said firmly. Documented time, visits, phone calls, assistance when needed, not just on holidays or when they want something. Austin shifted uncomfortably beside me. Grandma, are you sure? I'm quite sure, I interrupted gently. Alden, is this possible? The lawyer tapped his pen thoughtfully against his pad. Unusual, but not unprecedented. We could structure it as a points-based system. Visits earn points, regular phone calls, helping with medical appointments or household needs. We'd need an impartial executor to track and verify. I'd like you to be the executor, Alden. You've known our family for years. You'll be fair. Alden looked thoughtful. And the lake house? That was always Buck's special concern. At the mention of the lake house, a memory surfaced with sudden clarity. Buck sitting on the dock at sunset, Austin beside him, both of them fishing quietly. Buck's voice, weakened by illness but still firm. Remember, son, some things are worth more than money. This place, these moments, this is the real inheritance. The lake house goes to Austin, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke it. Immediately, not after my passing. With the provision that I may use it whenever I wish, and that family members can still vacation there with his permission. Austin's head snapped up. Grandma, no, I can't accept that. What about the others? It should be shared, like you and Grandpa wanted. I turned to face my grandson, seeing in him all the values Buck and I had tried to instill in our family: generosity, fairness, compassion. Austin, who drove me to the lake house last month just because I mentioned missing the spring wildflowers? He looked down at his hands. I did. And who helped replace the dock boards last summer? Who checks the pipes every winter to make sure they don't freeze? I do, but your grandfather and I bought that place to be used, to be loved, to be a gathering place for family. The others see it as an asset to be liquidated. You see it as we did, as a home. What about Colton and the others? Austin asked quietly. This will devastate them. Perhaps, I acknowledged, or perhaps it will awaken them to what truly matters. I turned back to Alden. There's one more thing. I want a letter included with the will. Something they'll all read after I'm gone. Alden nodded. We can arrange that. As we worked through the details, something shifted inside me. A weight lifting, a clarity emerging. For years, I had measured my worth as a mother and grandmother by what I gave, materially and emotionally. I had confused generosity with self-sacrifice, had allowed myself to become a resource rather than a person. No more. On the drive home, Austin was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. Grandma, are you doing this to punish them? Because of what Colton did? I considered his question carefully. No, not to punish. To teach, perhaps. Or simply to acknowledge reality. People reveal themselves through their actions. Austin, I've been refusing to see what's right in front of me for too long. They'll be angry, he warned. There will be drama. Yes, I agreed, looking out at the spring landscape, buds just beginning to open on the trees. But I've discovered something important, Austin. At 76, I have less time ahead of me than behind. I don't wish to spend it being taken for, granted, or treated with disrespect. Austin reached over and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I think Grandpa would be proud of you right now. Tears pricked at my eyes, but they weren't entirely sad ones. Thank you, dear. I think perhaps he would. When we arrived home, there was a sleek black car in the driveway that I recognized immediately, Patsy's. My middle child, always the most volatile of my children, was waiting. Ready for this? Austin asked, concern evident in his voice. I straightened my pearls and lifted my chin. Quite ready. The time for pleasant fictions is over. Now we deal. In truths. Patsy was pacing on my front porch, her designer heels clicking in impatient rhythm. When she saw Austin helping me from the car, her expression shifted from irritation to a manufactured smile. Mom! There you are. I've been waiting. For almost an hour. Her eyes flickered to Austin, a momentary calculation visible in them. Austin? What a surprise to see you. Hello, Aunt Patsy, Austin replied politely, but I felt his hand tighten slightly on my elbow. What brings you by, Patsy? I asked as Austin unlocked the front door. I wasn't expecting you. Well, I thought we should talk, she said, following us inside. Her gaze swept critically over the living room. The worn furniture Buck and I had chosen together decades ago, the faded curtains, the shelves of books and family photos. I'd never cared much for redecorating after Buck passed. What was the point? Austin, would you mind making some tea? I asked, settling into Buck's old armchair. Actually, Mom, Patsy interjected quickly, I was hoping we could speak privately. She gave Austin a pointed look. Austin glanced at me, questioning. I nodded slightly. It's all right. Go ahead and start the kettle. Once Austin had disappeared, into the kitchen, Patsy leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. Mom, what's this I hear about you changing your will? So that was it. News traveled fast in our family, at least when money was involved. Claire called you, I presume? Of course she called me. She's worried sick. We all are. Patsy's perfectly manicured hand reached for mine. Mom, making decisions when you're upset is never a good idea. Whatever happened with Colton, and I'm sure he was partly at fault, it's not worth disrupting our entire family over. I gently withdrew my hand from hers. And who told you what happened with Colton? Did you speak to him directly? Patsy waved dismissively. Beatrice filled me in. She said there was a misunderstanding about the lake house, that you overreacted when Colton expressed interest in it. Interest, I repeated, the word hollow. Is that what they're calling it? Did she mention that this interest included demanding I sign it over so they could sell it? Or that when I refused, Colton threw my heart medication across the kitchen? Patsy's eyes widened briefly before her expression smoothed. I'm sure it wasn't quite that dramatic, Mom. You know how Colton can be passionate when he's disappointed. And really, the lake house. When was the last time you even went there? It's just sitting empty most of the year. I was there 3 weeks ago, I said, echoing what I'd told Colton. With Austin. Well, that's nice, Patsy said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. But be practical, Mom. You're not getting any younger. Maintaining 2 properties at your age isn't sensible. And Colton and Beatrice could really use the help getting started. That Rosewood Hills neighborhood is very exclusive. I'm aware of my age, thank you, I said quietly. And yes, I've been to see my lawyer today. My will is being revised. Patsy's face tightened. Mom, please tell me you're not doing something rash. Daddy always insisted everything be split equally. It's what's fair. Fair, I echoed, the word bitter on my tongue. Tell me, Patsy, when was the last time Annabelle visited me? Not called asking for money for another of her schemes, but actually visited? Patsy straightened, defensive. Annabelle is extremely busy with her entrepreneurial ventures. You know that. She's networking, building her brand. It's a different world now, Mom. Young people have to hustle constantly just to stay afloat. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I sit, hustling looks remarkably like posting beach photos from Cabo while simultaneously texting me that she can't make rent and needs another $2,000. That's not fair. Building a business requires investment in relationships, in presenting the right image. Patsy, I interrupted, suddenly weary of the pretense. Your daughter has started and abandoned 6 businesses in 3 years. She's not an entrepreneur. She's a dilettante playing with my retirement money. Patsy stood abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. I can't believe you'd say that about your own granddaughter. After everything we've done for you. Those words again, the same ones Colton had hurled at me. And what exactly have you done for me, Patsy? Please, enlighten me. We've included you in our lives. We call, we visit. When? I challenged. When do you visit except when you need something? When do you call except to tell me why Annabelle needs more money, or why you can't pick me up for a doctor's appointment, or why this year's Christmas will again be at your house where I'll sit alone in a corner while everyone exchanges gifts I wrapped and paid for? Patsy stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Mom, are you feeling all right? You don't sound like yourself. Actually, I'm feeling more like myself than I have in years, I said, a strange calm settling over me. I've been a convenience to this family for too long. A source of child care, money, emotional support, giving and giving while receiving. Very little in return. That's what mothers do, Patsy shot back. That's what grandmothers do. They give. They don't keep score. There's a difference between giving freely and being taken advantage of, I said quietly. And yes, my will is changing to reflect that difference. Austin appeared in the doorway, a tray of tea things in his hands. The look he gave me was full of quiet pride. Patsy glanced between us, her eyes narrowing. So that's it, she said coldly. Austin's turned you against us. Austin has done nothing of the sort, I replied. He has simply been present, been thoughtful, been the kind of grandson Buck and I hope to raise. And what does that make my children? Or Claire's? Patsy demanded, voice rising. What? Because they have their own lives, their own struggles, they're somehow lesser? I sighed deeply. No one is lesser, Patsy. Everyone has simply made their choices, and now I'm making mine. And what exactly are these choices? She pressed. What are you planning to do with your property, with Daddy's money? That's between me and my lawyer, I said simply. But I will tell you this. From now on, my relationship with my grandchildren will be based on genuine connection, not financial expectation. Patsy snatched up her purse, hands shaking. You'll regret this, Mom. When you're sick or lonely or need help, you'll regret alienating your family. I already am sick and lonely and in need of help, I replied calmly. The only difference is that now I'm acknowledging it instead of pretending all is well for everyone else's comfort. After Patsy stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Austin and I sat in silence, sipping our tea. The confrontation had left me drained but oddly peaceful, as if a long-festering wound had finally been lanced. Are you okay, Grandma? Austin asked finally. I considered his question carefully. I believe I am. It's strange. I've spent years afraid of upsetting anyone, of being seen as difficult or demanding. But now that I've started standing up for myself, I find I'm not nearly as fragile as I feared. Austin smiled. You've always been the strongest person I know. You just didn't know it. That night, alone in the bedroom I'd shared with Buck for 48 years, I pulled out the old photo albums. There we were on our wedding day, so young and hopeful. There were Claire, Patsy, and their brother Beau as children, laughing on the tire swing Buck had hung from the oak tree. There were the grandchildren as babies, as toddlers, as teenagers, Colton with his first car, that we'd helped pay for, Annabelle at her high school graduation, in the dress I'd sewn, and Austin helping Buck build the new dock at the lake. House. In the quiet darkness, I allowed myself to weep, not just for what had been lost, but for what had never truly existed, except in my desperate desire to believe in the family I thought we were. Oh, Buck, I whispered to the empty room. I've been such a fool. I've given and given, thinking it would make them love me more, when all it did was teach them to value me less. The only answer was the soft ticking of the bedside clock and the gentle whir of the ceiling fan. But somehow, I felt Buck would have understood. He'd always seen our children more clearly than I had always been the one to set boundaries when I couldn't bear to. "I'm doing it now, my love," I told his memory. Better late than never, I suppose. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains Buck had never wanted to replace, casting delicate patterns across my bedroom wall. I'd slept surprisingly well despite the confrontations of the previous day. There was a certain liberation in speaking truths long kept silent. Over breakfast, simple toast and coffee that I ate alone at the kitchen table, I made a decision. I needed to see the patterns clearly, to understand fully how my relationships with my children and grandchildren had evolved over time. No more rose-colored memories or convenient excuses. I retrieved a blank notebook from the desk in the study and began to write. Dates, events, interactions, as objectively as I could recall them. When each grandchild had last visited without wanting something. When my children had called just to check on me. How birthdays and holidays had been celebrated in recent years. Who had helped when I'd fallen ill with pneumonia last winter. The picture that emerged was starker than even I had imagined. In the past 2 years, Austin had visited 37 times, often driving the 2 hours from the university just to have lunch with me or help with household tasks. He called at least twice a week, remembered every birthday and anniversary, and had spent 3 nights sleeping in a chair beside my hospital bed during my pneumonia. Colton had visited 7 times, each visit coinciding with a request for money or assistance. The pattern was remarkably consistent. First the warm greeting and surface-level catch-up, then the careful inquiry about my finances, followed by the eventual request, typically framed as a short-term need that was, in reality, neither short-term nor genuine need. Annabelle's pattern was even more transparent. She never visited at all, preferring to call when she needed money for her latest venture. These calls followed a script so predictable I could almost recite it with her. The effusive greeting, the cursory, "How are you, Grandma?" Never waiting for a real answer. The breathless excitement about her newest opportunity. And finally, the carefully calculated request for exactly the amount she thought I would give without too much resistance. My daughter's behaviors showed their own patterns. Claire, always the diplomat, maintained surface-level pleasantries while subtly facilitating her children's requests. Patsy was more direct, viewing my resources as essentially family property to which all had some entitled claim. My son Beau, who had moved to Arizona years ago, maintained minimal contact, a Christmas card, an occasional call on my birthday. He rarely asked for anything, but he rarely offered anything either. As I filled page after page, a cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't about one incident with Colton, or even the cumulative effect of many small disappointments. This was a fundamental misalignment of values. A family that had come to view me primarily as a resource rather than a person deserving of care and respect. The telephone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Claire. "Mom," she began without preamble. "Patsy called me last night. She was very upset." "I imagine she was," I replied calmly, closing my notebook. "She says you're planning to disinherit the children except for Austin. That you're giving him the lake house." I sighed. "That's not entirely accurate, but yes, I am revising my will. The lake house is going to Austin. That part is true." Claire's intake of breath was audible. "Mom, you can't do that. It's not fair. To the others. We always agreed everything would be split equally." Life isn't always equal, Claire. Neither are relationships or the effort people put into them. So this is some kind of, what, punishment? A way to make us prove our love? "No," I said firmly. "It's a recognition of reality. Austin has been present in my life in ways the others haven't. He's shown care and concern without expectation of reward. The lake house means something to him beyond its monetary value. And it doesn't to the rest of us? Claire challenged. When was the last time you visited the lake house, Claire? I asked. When was the last time Colton went there except to assess how much it might sell for? Silence on the other end. I thought so, I continued. Austin goes regularly. He maintains it, enjoys it, values it for what it is, not what it's worth. Mom, please? Claire's voice took on a pleading tone. This will tear the family apart. Colton and Annabelle will never forgive you, or Austin. Perhaps they should be asking themselves why Austin is receiving the lake house rather than blaming him or me for the decision. It's not that simple and you know it, Claire said, frustration evident. Family dynamics are complicated. Everyone shows love differently. Just because Austin has more free time to visit, stop, I interrupted, suddenly weary of the excuses. This isn't about free time, Claire. This is about choices. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. We all decide how to allocate our attention, our care, our presence. Your children have consistently chosen to give me their attention only when they want something in return. That's not a time management issue. It's a values issue. You're being unfair, Claire insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Let me ask you something, Claire. Do you know what medication I take for my heart condition? Do you know who my doctor is? When my next appointment is? Silence. Austin. Knows, I said quietly. He has it all written down. He drives me to every appointment because I can't see well enough to drive myself anymore, something I've mentioned to you several times, though you always seem to forget when I need a ride, somewhere. Mom, Last month, I continued, the words flowing freely now, I mentioned to Annabelle that my garbage disposal was broken. Do you know what she said? She said, "That's too bad, Grandma. Hey, I need $500 for a social media marketing course." She didn't even suggest calling a plumber. Austin drove over that weekend and fixed it himself. We can't all be Austin, Claire said defensively. No, but you could all show basic concern for my well-being, I replied. You could all remember that I'm a person, not just a convenient source of childcare and financial support. Claire was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was tight with restrained emotion. What do you want from us, Mom? Just tell us what you want. The plaintiveness of her question caught me off guard. What did I want? The answer came with surprising clarity. I want to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide, I said simply. I want visits that aren't preludes to requests. I want conversations where someone asks how I'm doing and actually listens to the answer. I want to be treated with the same consideration and respect that you'd give to a friend. And if we do all that, you'll change your will back? Claire asked, immediately confirming my point. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Claire, I said, disappointment heavy in my voice. You're still seeing this as a transaction. Be nice to Mom, get her money. That's not a relationship. It's a business arrangement. That's not what I meant, she backpedaled quickly. I just want to understand what you're asking for. I'm not asking for anything, I clarified. I'm stating what I need to feel respected and loved. What you and the others do with that information is entirely up to you. But yes, my estate will be distributed based on the relationships I have with each of you in my remaining years. That decision is made. After we hung up, I returned to my notebook, adding Claire's call to the pattern I'd been documenting. The response was so predictable, so aligned with everything that had come before, that it only confirmed my decision. Later, that afternoon I called Austin. Would you be free this weekend to take me to the lake house? I asked. There are some things there I'd like to go through. Of course, Grandma, he replied without hesitation. I'll pick you up Saturday morning. Should we stay overnight? Yes, I think that would be nice. The wildflowers should be lovely this time of year. They are, he said. and I could hear the smile in his voice. The trilliums are just starting to bloom in the woods behind the cabin. That he knew this, that he had noticed. It was such a small thing, yet it spoke volumes. As I packed a small bag for the weekend, I thought about the patterns I'd documented, about the relationships that had slowly eroded through years of imbalance and presumption. There was sadness in this recognition, certainly, but also a strange sense of peace. Seeing clearly, even when the view is painful, is preferable to comfortable illusion. Buck had always said, "The truth may hurt, but lies in fact." After years of infection, of telling myself that my children and grandchildren were just busy, that they still cared deeply, that the lack of reciprocity in our relationships was normal, the truth, however painful, felt like the beginning of healing. The lake house stood just as Buck and I had left it decades ago. A modest 2-bedroom cabin with weathered cedar siding and a wide porch facing the water. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but its simplicity was precisely what we'd loved about it. A place where time slowed, where the rhythms of nature prevailed over the demands of schedules and obligations. Austin carried my bag inside, opening windows to release the slight mustiness that had accumulated since our last visit. "Would you like some tea, Grandma? I brought that chamomile you like." "That would be lovely," I said, settling into the old rocking chair on the porch. From here, I could see the dock where Buck had taught each grandchild to fish, the sandy shoreline where they'd built castles and hunted for interesting stones, the fire pit where we'd roasted marshmallows on summer evenings. So many memories, layered over this place. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle breeze off the water, listening to the familiar lap of small waves against the shore. Austin brought my tea and sat in the adjacent rocker, content to share the silence. That was another thing I'd always appreciated about him. He didn't feel the need to fill every moment with chatter. "I've been thinking about what to do with some of the family heirlooms," I said finally. "Your grandfather's fishing gear, my mother's china, the quilts your great-grandmother made." Austin nodded. "Important decisions. No rush, though, right?" "No rush," I agreed. "But I'd like to be intentional about it. Things should go to those who will value them, not just as possessions, but for what they represent." We spent the morning going through the cabin, making notes about certain items. The handmade chess set Buck had loved, the collection of first edition books I'd acquired over decades, the watercolor paintings by a local artist who'd since become quite renowned. Around noon, Austin was checking the water heater in the small utility room when his phone rang. He glanced at it, then back at me with an odd expression. "It's Colton," he said. "Should I answer?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Austin put the call on speaker and set the phone on the counter between us. "Hey, Colton, what's up?" "Austin, man, where are you?" Colton's voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "I stopped by Grandma's place, but nobody's home." "We're at the lake house," Austin replied, catching my eye. "Just doing some maintenance." "The lake house?" Colton's tone shifted slightly. "That's perfect, actually. Beatrice and I were thinking of driving up there tomorrow. You know, to apologize to Grandma in person for that misunderstanding the other day." I raised my eyebrows at the word misunderstanding. Austin's expression mirrored my skepticism. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Colton," Austin said carefully. "Grandma's pretty tired, and we're planning to head back early tomorrow." No, it's important," Colton insisted. "Family needs to stick together. Plus, I want to show Beatrice the property. She's never been. Can you believe it? After all these years?" I could believe it all too easily. Beatrice had always made it clear that rustic settings weren't to her taste. "Let me talk to Grandma about it," Austin hedged. "I'll call you back." After ending the call, Austin looked at me questioningly. "What do you think? Do you want to see them?" I considered the question carefully. I think we both know why they suddenly want to visit, and it's not to offer a genuine apology. Austin nodded, understanding. They heard about the will changes. They want to assess the property value. Most likely, I agreed. But perhaps we should let them come. It might be educational. Austin looked uncertain. Are you sure, Grandma? I don't want you upset again. I'm sure, I said, feeling strangely calm. Some confrontations are necessary. Austin called Colton back and arranged for them to visit the following morning. We spent the rest of the day peacefully, walking along the shore, collecting interesting stones, preparing a simple dinner, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in brilliant oranges and pinks. I slept soundly in the room Buck and I had shared for so many summers, lulled by the familiar sounds of water lapping at the shore and wind rustling through pine needles. Morning brought clear skies and the distant call of loons across the water. Austin made breakfast, his grandfather's recipe for sourdough pancakes, with wild blueberries we'd picked last summer and frozen. It was a quiet, pleasant meal until the sound of tires on gravel announced our visitors. Colton's luxury SUV pulled up beside Austin's modest sedan, looking as out of place as a peacock in a chicken coop. Colton emerged first, dressed as if for a country club in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, followed by Beatrice in what appeared to be brand-new outdoor attire, complete with a wide-brimmed hat and pristine hiking boots that had clearly never seen dirt. "Grandma!" Colton called with exaggerated warmth, bounding up the porch steps to kiss my cheek. "You're looking well. The lake air agrees with you." "Hello, Colton," I replied evenly. "Beatrice." Beatrice offered a stiff smile, her eyes already scanning the property assessingly. "This is quaint," she managed, in a tone that suggested she meant the opposite. "Isn't it great?" Colton enthused, his performance almost painful to watch. "I have so many memories here. Remember when Grandpa taught me to fish off that dock? Remember the campfires and ghost stories?" I did remember teaching Colton to fish, since Buck had been ill by the time Colton was old enough. And the last time Colton had visited, years ago, he'd spent the entire weekend on his phone, complaining about the poor reception. "Come inside," Austin offered, a slight edge to his usual warmth. "I've made coffee." Once we were settled in the cabin's small living room, an awkward silence fell. Beatrice perched on the edge of the sofa as if afraid it might dirty her expensive clothing, while Colton's eyes darted around, likely mentally cataloging what could be sold. "So," Colton finally began, clapping his hands together, "I wanted to apologize properly for my behavior the other day. I was out of line, totally out of line. It's just been a stressful time with the house hunting and work pressures, but that's no excuse for taking it out on you." The apology sounded rehearsed, empty of genuine remorse. I simply nodded, waiting. "And," he continued when I didn't respond, "I've been thinking a lot about this place, about how special it is to our family, the history here, the connection to Grandpa." "Have you?" I asked mildly. "Absolutely," he insisted, warming to his script. "That's why I wanted Beatrice to see it, to understand why it means so much to all of us." "It's certainly rustic," Beatrice offered, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "Very natural." "That was always the appeal," I said. "Your grandfather didn't want anything fancy. Just a quiet place where the family could gather, away from distractions." "Exactly," Colton exclaimed, as if I'd made his point for him. "And that's why I've been reconsidering my position. The lake house should stay in the family, absolutely, 100%. I'm glad to hear you've had a change of heart," I said, though we all knew what had prompted it. "So much history here," Colton continued, gesturing expansively. "And actually, Beatrice and I were thinking, if you wanted to transfer the property now, we could take over the maintenance, the property taxes, all that burden. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." And there it was, the real purpose of this visit, the true motivation behind the sudden appreciation for family history. "That's very thoughtful," I said, keeping my voice neutral. But I've already made arrangements for the lake house. Colton's smile faltered slightly. What kind of arrangements? I've decided to transfer ownership to Austin, I said simply. Effective? Immediately. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Beatrice's eyes widened, while Colton's face went through a rapid succession of expressions. Shock, confusion, anger. To Austin? He finally managed, his voice strangled. But that's not fair. This is a family property. It should be shared. That's what Grandpa would have wanted. Your grandfather wanted the lake house to be used and loved, I corrected. Gently. Not sold to fund a lifestyle beyond your means. Colton's facade cracked. This is about the other day, isn't it? One mistake and you're punishing me, giving everything to the golden boy here. He jabbed a finger toward Austin, who remained calm, though I could see the tension in his posture. This isn't about punishment, Colton, I said. It's about recognizing who values this place for what it is, not what it's worth. That's bull... Colton caught himself, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a snarl. Come on, Grandma. We all know what's going on here. Austin's been working you, playing the devoted grandson, while the rest of us have actual lives and responsibilities. Is that what you think caring for your grandmother is? Being worked? I asked quietly. You know what I mean, Colton said dismissively. Austin's always been good at playing the long game. Austin started to respond, but I held up a hand. Austin doesn't need to defend himself. His actions speak for him just as yours do for you. Colton's face darkened. So that's it? You've made up your mind based on what? Who visits most often? Who calls the most? Not everyone can drop everything to drive out here every weekend. This isn't about frequency of visits, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. This is about intention, about respect, about seeing me as a person, not an asset to be managed or exploited. Exploited? Colton practically spat the word. Is that what you think we're doing? After everything we've done for you? There it was again. That phrase that seemed to be the family refrain. Everything we've done for you. As if I were a burden they'd nobly shouldered rather than a person who had given them everything. What exactly have you done for me, Colton? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. Please enlighten me. When I fell and couldn't get up, where were you? When I needed rides to doctor's appointments, where were you? When I spent Christmas alone? Because no one would drive me to Patsy's? Where were you? Beatrice shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in her manicure. That's not fair, Colton protested. We have jobs, responsibilities. So does Austin, I interrupted. Yet somehow he manages to check on me regularly, to help with house repairs, to simply call and ask how I'm doing without wanting something in return. This is ridiculous, Colton said, standing abruptly. Austin's been poisoning your mind against us. This isn't like you, Grandma. On the contrary, I replied. This is exactly like me. The real me, not the doormat you and the others have come to expect. The woman who raised your mother to be strong and independent, who taught school for 30 years, who nursed your grandfather through a long illness without complaint. That woman has been too quiet for too long, but she's speaking now. Colton turned to Austin, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. You think you're so clever, don't you? Playing the devoted grandson while undermining the rest of us. What's your end game here? Get the lake house, then what? The main house too? All of Grandma's investments? Austin met his cousin's gaze steadily. I don't have an end game, Colton. I just care about Grandma. Right, Colton sneered. St. Austin, so selfless, so perfect. Tell me, does Grandma know about the money problems at the university? About your fellowship falling through? Pretty convenient timing to suddenly become her favorite. I saw a flash of hurt cross Austin's face before he composed himself. Grandma knows everything about my situation. I've never hidden anything from her, And for the record, I told her not to give me the lake house. I argued against it. Oh, I'm sure you did, Beatrice spoke up suddenly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Such a transparent play. Pretend to refuse so you look noble, all while knowing. She'll insist. We're not idiots. That's enough, I said sharply, my patience finally reaching its limit. I won't sit here and listen to you attack Austin for having the basic decency to treat me with respect. The decision about the lake house is made. The paperwork is being processed. It's done. You can't do this, Colton insisted, his voice rising. It's not just yours to give away. Grandpa would never have approved. Don't you dare invoke your grandfather's wishes, I said, standing to face him despite my arthritic knees protesting the sudden movement. Buck saw through you long before I did. That boy, he used to say, values things over people. He worried about the kind of man you were becoming. Turns out he was right to worry. Colton's face flushed red. So now I'm a disappointment too? Perfect. Anything else you want to get off your chest while you're rewriting family history? Yes, actually, I said, feeling a lifetime of suppressed truths rising to the surface. I am disappointed, Colton, not in your career or your achievements, but in your character. In the person you've chosen to become. Someone who throws an elderly woman's medication across the room when he doesn't get what he wants. Someone who visits his grandmother only when he needs money. Someone who sees his grandfather's beloved lake house as nothing more than a commodity to be liquidated for his own benefit. This is insane, Colton muttered, running a hand through his hair. You've completely lost touch with reality. No, I said firmly. For the first time in years, I'm seeing reality exactly as it is. And it's painful, but necessary. Beatrice stood, placing a restraining hand on Colton's arm. Aye, she said tightly. This is getting us nowhere. You're making a huge mistake, Grandma, Colton said, his voice now cold. You'll regret this. When you need help, when you're sick or can't manage alone, don't come crawling to us. The threat, for that's what it was, hung in the air between us. I met his gaze steadily. I would never crawl to anyone, Colton, especially not to someone who has made it abundantly clear that their assistance comes with conditions and expectations of repayment. Fine, he snapped. Give everything to Austin. See if he takes care of you when the money's gone. Let's go, Beatrice. As they stormed toward the door, Colton paused, turning back with a final parting shot. You know what? You deserve to end up alone. You and your precious Austin can have your little lake house. The rest of us are done. The door slammed behind them with such force that one of Buck's fishing lures fell from its hook on the wall, landing with a small clatter on the wooden floor. The silence that followed was profound. Austin moved to pick up the lure, carefully returning it to its place. I'm sorry, Grandma, he said quietly. I didn't mean to come between you and the family. You didn't, I assured him, easing back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. They did that themselves long ago. I just didn't want to see it. I looked around the small cabin that had housed so many memories. Children laughing, meals shared, quiet evenings by the fire. For years, I'd clutched desperately to an image of family harmony that had existed more in my hopes than in reality. The pain of letting go was acute, but there was also a strange relief in finally acknowledging the truth. Do you regret it? Austin asked hesitantly. Telling them about the lake house? Standing up to Colton? I considered his question carefully, watching through the window as Colton's SUV kicked up gravel in its hasty departure. No, I said finally. I regret that it came to this. I regret not setting boundaries years ago, when the patterns first began to establish themselves. But I don't regret speaking my truth today. Some things need to be said, even if they're painful to hear. Austin nodded, understanding. What happens now? Now, I said, reaching for my teacup, which had gone cold during the confrontation. We continue as we were. I imagine there will be fallout. Angry calls from Claire and Patsy, perhaps even attempts to contest the will changes when the time comes. But I'm prepared for that. And the rest of the family? Colton, Annabelle, the others? I sighed, feeling the weight of the morning's events settling on my shoulders. They have choices to make. They can reflect on what's happened, on their own behavior, and perhaps make changes. Or they can continue as they have been, seeing me only as a source of financial support rather than a person worthy of respect and care. Either way, I'll be fine. You will, Austin agreed, reaching over to squeeze my hand. You're stronger than all of us put together. Later that afternoon, as predicted, my phone began to ring incessantly. Claire, then Patsy, then even my son Beau calling from Arizona, each demanding explanations, each expressing shock and outrage at what they'd heard from Colton. I let the calls go to voicemail. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with their reactions. Today, I wanted peace. Austin and I took the old rowboat out on the lake, drifting quietly in the afternoon sun. Dragonflies skimmed the water's surface, and somewhere in the distance, a fish jumped with a quiet splash. Your grandfather loved days like this, I told Austin, trailing my fingers in the cool water. He said you could feel God in the silence. Austin nodded, his eyes on the distant shore. I remember. He taught me to listen for what he called the spaces between noise, said that's where the important things happen. That evening, as fireflies began to appear along the shoreline, I took out a pen and paper and began to write the letter that would accompany my will, the words my family would read after I was gone. No more protecting them from uncomfortable truths. No more sacrificing my dignity to preserve a false peace. The truth may hurt, Buck had always said, but lies infect. It was time to heal the infection, even if the cure was painful. The week, following the confrontation at the lake house, unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. My phone rang constantly with calls from Claire, Patsy, and various grandchildren. I let most go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly indignant messages, with a calm detachment that surprised even me. Mom, you need to call me back. This has gone far enough, Claire's voice demanded from my answering machine. The family is in chaos. Colton is beside himself. We need to talk about this rationally. Patsy was less diplomatic. I can't believe you'd do this to your own family, picking favorites, creating divisions. This isn't you, Mom. This is Austin's influence. Call me back immediately. Even Annabelle, who rarely contacted me except for financial requests, left a message. Grandma, it's Anna. I'm really hurt that you'd give the lake house to Austin without even talking to the rest of us. I have so many memories there. Remember? When I was 10 and you taught me to make blueberry jam? I was planning to bring my future children there someday. I had indeed taught Annabelle to make blueberry jam, a memory she'd apparently excavated for this strategic moment. What she didn't mention was that she hadn't visited the lake house since that summer 16 years ago, having declared it boring and full of bugs upon reaching adolescence. Austin, true to his nature, offered to mediate. I could talk to them, Grandma. Explain that this was your decision, not mine. No, I said firmly. They'll only see that as confirmation that you're manipulating me. This isn't your burden to bear. On the 5th day of this communication siege, I finally answered a call from Claire. Mom? Thank God. She breathed when she heard my voice. We've been so worried. There's no need for worry, I replied calmly. I'm perfectly fine. We need to talk about this lake house situation, she pressed. The family is falling apart. Colton won't speak to Austin. Patsy is talking about legal action. Even Beau is upset, and you know how uninvolved he usually is. I'm sorry they're upset, I said, but my decision stands. Mom, please. Claire's voice took on the placating tone she'd used since childhood when trying to manage a difficult situation. Can we at least meet and discuss this like adults? All of us together? Maybe we can find a compromise that everyone can live with. I considered refusing. After all, I'd made my position clear. But perhaps there was value in one final family conversation, one last opportunity to be heard. Very well, I agreed. Sunday dinner at my house, 4 o'clock. Thank you, Mom. Claire exhaled with relief. I'll let everyone know. We'll work this out, I promise. After hanging up, I called Austin. The family is coming for dinner on Sunday. I'd like you to be there. Are you sure that's a good idea? He asked cautiously. Colton was pretty clear about his feelings toward me. I'm sure, I replied. This isn't just about the lake house anymore. It's about establishing how I expect to be treated going forward. I want you there, Austin. I need at least one person at the table who sees me clearly. Sunday arrived with ominous gray clouds gathering on the horizon, matching my apprehension about the coming confrontation. I spent the morning preparing, not just the meal, a simple pot roast with vegetables from my garden, but mentally fortifying myself for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Austin arrived early to help, quietly moving around my kitchen, with the easy familiarity of someone who had spent time there. By 4 o'clock the table was set, the roast was resting, and we were waiting. Claire arrived first, her husband Alden in tow. She kissed my cheek with forced cheerfulness. It smells wonderful, Mom. Thank you, I replied, noting how her eyes darted nervously between Austin and me. Patsy and her husband arrived next, followed closely by Beau, who had flown in from Arizona specifically for this meeting, a fact he mentioned repeatedly, as if his presence was an extraordinary sacrifice. Requiring acknowledgement, Colton and Beatrice were last, entering with tight smiles and stiff postures. Colton pointedly ignored Austin, while Beatrice surveyed my home with the barely concealed disdain she always exhibited for anything she deemed insufficiently fashionable. Annabelle had sent regrets via text message. Super important networking. Event tonight? Can't miss it. Fill me in later. Love you, Grams. The casual dismissal stung, but wasn't surprising. We gathered around the dining table in uncomfortable silence. I had deliberately seated Austin directly across from Colton, forcing a visual confrontation even if they wouldn't speak directly to each other. Before we begin eating, I said once everyone was seated, I want to be clear about the purpose of this gathering. I've made my decision regarding the lake house. It's not up for debate or negotiation. I invited you here to explain my reasoning and to discuss how we move forward as a family. Mom? Patsy interrupted immediately. That's not fair. You can't just unilaterally change what Dad always intended. I held up a hand, stopping her. Your father and I discussed many things before he passed, Patsy. Not all of our conversations included you children. Now, I've made my decision, and it's final. The lake house transfers to Austin. The rest of my estate will be distributed according to the terms of my updated will. Which are what exactly? Colton asked, his tone attempting politeness while his eyes remained cold. That's between me and my lawyer, I replied. But I will say this. Going forward, my relationships with each of you will be based on mutual respect and genuine care, not financial expectation. Claire leaned forward, ever the mediator. Mom, no one is saying we only care about money, but family assets have always been shared equally. That's the fair way, the way that prevents resentment and division. Fair, I repeated thoughtfully. Let's talk about fairness, shall we? Is it fair that Austin drives 2 hours every week to check on me, while the rest of you visit only when you want something? Is it fair that he maintains the lake house, keeps it in good repair, honors your grandfather's legacy there, while Colton sees it only as a commodity to be sold? Is it fair that when I was ill last winter, it was Austin who slept in a hospital chair for 3 nights, while the rest of you were too busy to visit more than once, if at all? A heavy silence fell over the table. Beau examined his water glass with sudden interest. Claire flushed deeply. Patsy crossed her arms defensively. We all show love differently, Mom. Claire finally offered. Not everyone expresses care the same way. That's true, I acknowledged. But at some point, love must be demonstrated, not just claimed. I'm not asking for grand gestures or constant attention. I'm asking for basic respect and consideration. So this is a test, Colton said flatly. Whoever jumps through Grandma's hoops gets the biggest piece of the pie. No, Colton, I corrected firmly. This is a recognition of reality. A relationship is a two-way connection. For years I've given money, time, emotional support, childcare, while receiving very little in return. That imbalance ends now. And if we don't like your terms, Patsy challenged, if we think this is unfair and hurtful, then that's your choice, I said simply. I'm not demanding anything from any of you. I'm simply establishing that from now on, how you treat me will determine the nature of our relationship, including, yes, financial considerations after I'm gone. An uncomfortable silence descended. Alden cleared his throat and reached for the potatoes, attempting to break the tension. These look delicious, Annabelle. From your garden? Yes, I said, grateful for the momentary respite. The carrots, too. We ate in strained silence for several minutes before Claire tried again. Mom, we all love you. If you've felt neglected or taken for granted, we're sorry, truly. But dividing the family like this, creating a situation where we're essentially competing for your approval, that can't be what you want. I don't want competition, I clarified. I want authentic relationships. I want to be treated as a person worthy of respect, not a resource to be managed or exploited. No one is exploiting you, Bo protested, speaking up for the first time. That's a harsh accusation, Mom. Is it? I asked, setting down my fork. Colton, when was the last time you called or visited without asking for money? Patsy, when did you last invite me to dinner just to enjoy my company, not to explain why Annabelle needed another investment in one of her schemes? Bo, when did you last ask about my health, my interests, my life? No one answered. Austin sat quietly, his presence a steady support even as he remained largely outside the conversation. I don't say these things to hurt you, I continued more gently. I say them because they're true, and because at my age, I don't have time for comfortable fictions anymore. I want real connections with my family for whatever time I have left. But those connections must be based on mutual respect and care, not obligation or financial interest. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I had no idea you felt this way. Why didn't you say something sooner? Would you have listened? I asked simply. Or would you have dismissed my concerns as the complaints of a difficult old woman? The truth of my words seemed to land with Claire. She looked down at her plate, a tear slipping down her cheek. Surprisingly, it was Alden who spoke next. Annabelle's right, he said quietly. We've taken her for granted. I've watched it happen for years, said nothing because it wasn't my place. But she deserves better from her family. Claire looked at her husband with surprise, then back at me. Mom, I'm sorry. Truly, we can do better. We will do better. I hope so, I said. Because I would much rather have relationships with my children and grandchildren than estrangement. But the choice is yours. By the time dessert was served, Buck's favorite apple pie, a detail not lost on those who remembered, a fragile truce had been established. No one was entirely happy, but a tentative understanding had been reached. The Lake House decision would stand. My will would remain as revised. And going forward, the family would make more effort to consider my needs and wishes. As they prepared to leave, Claire hugged me tightly. We'll figure this out, Mom. As a family, I promise. I returned her embrace, wanting to believe her, yet wary of promises too easily made in moments of emotional resolution. Austin stayed behind to help with the dishes. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, He finally asked the question I could see had been bothering him all evening. "Do you think anything will really change, Grandma?" I handed him a plate to dry, considering. "Perhaps, for a while at least. Old patterns are hard to break, though. We'll see." "I just hope they understand what you're really asking for," he said, carefully placing the dried plate in the cabinet. "It's not about visits or phone calls or who does what chores. It's about seeing you. Really seeing you." I smiled at my grandson, touched once again by his insight. "Exactly, dear. Exactly." In the weeks following our family dinner, a kind of cautious peace settled over us. True to their word, at least initially, my children and grandchildren made visible efforts to change their behavior. The transformation was so dramatic it might have been comical had it not been tinged with such obvious calculation. Claire called. Every other day, her voice carefully modulated to convey cheerful interest. "Just checking in, Mom. How are you feeling today? Did you watch that documentary I mentioned? I've been thinking about your garden. Have the tomatoes come in yet?" Patsy began inviting me to lunch every Thursday at the country club where she and her husband were members. She'd introduce me to her friends with exaggerated affection, her arm linked through mine as if we'd always been the closest of companions. "Mom is just the wisest person I know," she'd gush to anyone who would listen. "I don't make a single important decision without her input." Even Beau, before returning to Arizona, spent an entire afternoon helping me organize the garden shed. A task he approached with such grim determination, it was clear he viewed it as an obligation to be endured rather than a pleasant way to spend time together. The grandchildren, too, made their appearances. Colton and Beatrice arrived one Sunday with an expensive orchid and invitations to dinner at their club. Annabelle began calling weekly, her conversations a strange mixture of forced interest in my activities and subtle reminders of her financial struggles. "Rent is due next week, and this startup is taking longer than expected to turn a profit. But don't worry about me, Grandma. How's your arthritis? Are you taking your medications regularly?" Only Austin remained unchanged, his visits and calls, continuing with the same genuine warmth and lack of pretense that had always characterized our relationship. We never spoke about the other's sudden attentiveness, but occasionally he would catch my eye during a particularly performative display of concern, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. It was Beatrice who first slipped. 6 weeks after the family dinner, she and Colton were visiting for Sunday lunch, something that had become a new tradition in their campaign of attentiveness. Beatrice had been checking her watch repeatedly throughout the meal, her smile growing more strained with each glance. "We should probably get going soon," she finally said as I was serving coffee. "We have that thing at 4. "What thing?" Colton asked, confusion evident on his face. Beatrice gave him a pointed look. "The thing. At the Hendersons, remember?" "Oh, right." Colton nodded, catching on. "Sorry, Grandma, we've got this commitment. Can't miss it." I smiled placidly. "Of course, dear. Don't let me keep you." "We'd cancel if we could," Beatrice assured me, already gathering her purse. "But it's been planned for ages." "Actually," I said, "before you go, I'd love your help bringing down a few boxes from the attic. I've been meaning to go through some of Buck's old things, and it's getting harder for me to manage the latter." The brief flash of annoyance that crossed Beatrice's face was quickly masked, but not quickly enough. "Oh, well, we're already running late, and these heels aren't really suitable for climbing around in attics." She glanced at Colton, clearly expecting him to extricate them. "I can do it, Grandma," Colton offered, though his enthusiasm seemed forced. "Which boxes do you need?" "The ones labeled Buck, personal." "There should be 3 or 4 of them." Colton nodded, heading for the attic stairs with visible reluctance. Left alone with Beatrice, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "You know, dear, you don't have to visit if you'd rather not." Beatrice blinked, clearly surprised by my directness. "What? No, we love visiting you. Colton treasures these lunches." "Does he?" I asked mildly. Or is this part of the new family campaign to demonstrate how much everyone suddenly cares about Grandma's well-being? Beatrice's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, I said kindly. And while I appreciate the effort, I'd prefer honest neglect to disingenuous attention. At least the former has the virtue of being authentic. Beatrice flushed, opening her mouth to respond just as Colton returned, dust smudging his expensive shirt, 3 cardboard boxes stacked in his arms. Here they are, Grandma, he said, setting them down with poorly concealed relief. Is there anything else you need before we go? No, that's all, I assured him. Thank you for your help. After they left, Beatrice practically pulling Colton through the door, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by boxes of Buck's belongings. I hadn't actually intended to go through them today. They'd merely been a test, a way of seeing how genuine this new attentiveness really was. The answer was clear. Beneath the veneer of caring, the old patterns remained. The visits, the calls, the offers of help, all were performances, calculated investments toward an expected return. Austin arrived an hour later for our regular Sunday afternoon checkers game, finding me still sitting among the unopened boxes. What's all this? He asked, gesturing to Buck's things. A little experiment, I replied, explaining what had happened with Colton and Beatrice. Austin shook his head. Does it surprise you? No, I admitted. But it disappoints me all the same. As July turned to August, the facade of family harmony began to show more cracks. The daily calls became every few days, then once a week. The lunch invitations grew less frequent. Annabelle, frustrated by my continued refusal to fund her latest venture, stopped calling altogether. It was Patsy who finally broached the subject during one of our increasingly rare lunch dates. Mom, she began, stirring her iced tea with uncharacteristic hesitation. I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. I'm always honest with you, Patsy, I replied. Whether you appreciate that honesty is another matter. She ignored my gentle barb. Has anyone been making progress? With the will situation, I mean. And there it was. The question that had clearly been simmering beneath all the forced attention and manufactured concern. Progress? I repeated, though I understood perfectly what she meant. You know, she continued, lowering her voice though. There was no one seated near us. Has anyone moved up in the rankings? Is Austin still the primary beneficiary? I set down my fork, studying my daughter's face. The face that had once been so open, so full of genuine emotion. When had calculation replaced connection in her eyes? Patsy, I said carefully, if your concern is where you stand in my will, then you've entirely missed the point of everything I've been trying to say. That's not fair, she protested. We've all been making an effort, calling more, visiting more. Isn't that what you wanted? What I wanted, I corrected her, was to be valued as a person, not a checkbook. To be seen as your mother, not a resource to be managed until my death. The fact that you're asking this question tells me you still don't understand. Patsy's expression hardened. So it has all been a test. You've been keeping score while we jump through hoops, never knowing if we're doing enough to satisfy you. No. One is keeping score, I said, though in fact Alden, as executor, was indeed documenting family interactions as I'd requested. But yes, I am paying attention to who treats me with genuine care versus who is simply performing caring to secure an inheritance. And how are we supposed to prove our caring is genuine? She demanded, making air quotes around the word. What's the magical formula that makes you believe we actually love you? Her words struck deep, the pain of them almost physical. There is no formula, Patsy. That's the point. Love isn't performative. It simply is. It shows itself in 1,000 small ways that can't be calculated or scheduled. This isn't fair, she repeated, her voice rising slightly. You've set up a system where Austin can't lose and the rest of us can't win. Austin isn't winning anything, I corrected. He's simply being himself, the same person he's always been. The fact that you see this as a competition rather than an opportunity for authentic connection is precisely the problem. Patsy stared at me for a long moment, then gathered her purse and stood. I need to go. I have an appointment. Of course, I said, not bothering to point out that she'd been the one to suggest lunch in the first place. Thank you for your time. As I watched my daughter walk away, her back rigid with indignation, I felt a deep sadness settle over me. This wasn't what I'd wanted, this strained, transactional relationship where every interaction was weighed for its potential benefit. But I couldn't return to the way things had been either, allowing myself to be used and taken for granted in the name of family harmony. That evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The garden Buck and I had tended for decades spread before me, late summer vegetables heavy on their vines, zinnias and black-eyed Susans nodding in the gentle breeze. What would you do, Buck? I whispered to the empty chair beside me, his chair, still positioned exactly as it had been when he was alive. Am I being too harsh, too unbending? No answer came, of course, but I could almost hear what he would say. Buck had never suffered fools or pretense. Be true to yourself, Annie, he'd often told me. At the end of the day, that's all any of us can do. The false harmony was crumbling, revealing the truth beneath, that for too many in my family, I was valued primarily for what I could provide, not who I was. It was a painful realization, but perhaps a necessary one. I picked up my telephone and dialed Austin's number. Grandma? He answered on the second ring. Everything okay? Yes, dear, I assured him. I was just wondering if you might come by tomorrow. There are some matters I'd like to discuss. September arrived with cooler temperatures and a certain crispness in the air that always reminded me of new beginnings. Perhaps it was my decades as a teacher, but autumn had always felt more like the start of a year than January ever did. I found myself spending more time in the garden, preparing it for winter, my hands in the soil providing a connection to the earth that soothed my troubled heart. The family situation had reached an uneasy equilibrium. After Patsy's outburst at lunch, she had retreated into a cool formality during our interactions, making the minimum effort required to maintain appearances without revealing any genuine emotion. Claire continued her regular calls, though they had become shorter and less frequent. Colton and Beatrice had reduced their visits to once a month, each one feeling more like an obligation fulfilled than a family connection. Bo called from Arizona on my birthday, our conversation as superficial as it had always been. Hope it's a good one, Mom, he'd said, the sounds of his television audible in the background. Did you get the flowers I sent? I had received no flowers, but I thanked him anyway, sparing us both the awkwardness of acknowledging the lie. Annabelle had sent a text message. Happy birthday, Grams. Love you lots. The minimum possible effort. A digital obligation discharged in seconds. Only Austin remained constant, his visits and calls continuing with the same genuine warmth that had always characterized our relationship. He'd prepared a special birthday dinner, bringing all the ingredients to my kitchen and shooing me out while he cooked. Grandpa's recipe for beef bourguignon, he'd announced proudly, presenting the dish with a flourish. It might not be exactly like his, but I tried. It had been delicious, but more precious was the thoughtfulness behind it. His remembering Buck's signature dish, his effort to recreate something meaningful to me. The day after my birthday, I received an unexpected call from Alden, my lawyer. Annabelle, he began without preamble, I've been approached by Claire and Patsy about your will. I sighed, unsurprised. What did they want? To contest the changes, he said bluntly. They're arguing that you're being unduly influenced by Austin, that the revised will doesn't reflect your true wishes. I see, I said, a heaviness settling in my chest despite my lack of surprise. And what did you tell them? That you're of perfectly sound mind, that the changes were made at your explicit direction, and that contesting the will would likely result in significant legal fees with little chance of success. I also reminded them that the will itself contains a no contest clause, which means anyone who challenges it is automatically disinherited. Thank you, Alden. There's more, he continued. They asked about the documentation I'm keeping regarding family interactions, wanted to know how visits and calls are being scored and how they're currently ranking. I closed my eyes, the mercenary nature of their inquiry painful even after everything that had transpired. As if it's a competition. Exactly, Alden agreed. I told them I couldn't discuss the specifics, but assured them that the documentation is factual, not subjective. Dates, times, nature of interactions. And how did they respond? Not well, he admitted. Patsy suggested they might seek a conservatorship, claiming you're no longer capable of managing your affairs. The word struck me like a physical blow. A conservatorship, my own children seeking to take control of my life, my decisions, my autonomy. It was almost unthinkable. On what grounds? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. They don't have any, Alden assured me. Your doctor confirms you're in excellent cognitive health. Your finances are impeccably managed. There's absolutely no basis for such a claim, and I told them as much. But they're considering it anyway? They're grasping at straws, Annabelle. They see the Lake House transfer as the beginning of a process that disinherits them in favor of Austin, and they're panicking. After we hung up, I sat in Buck's chair on the porch, watching goldfinches flit among the fading zinnias. A conservatorship. My own children, seeking to declare me incompetent simply because I'd finally stood up for myself, finally demanded the respect I deserved. The betrayal cut deep, deeper even than Colton's tantrum or Patsy's accusations. This was a fundamental rejection of my personhood, my dignity, my right to make my own choices. That evening, I received a call from Claire. Her voice was artificially bright, giving no indication of her behind-the-scenes legal inquiries. Mom, I've been thinking. It's been ages since we had a real family gathering. What if we did Thanksgiving at your house this year? Everyone together, like the old days. My initial instinct was to refuse. After learning of their conservatorship discussions, the last thing I wanted was to host a performance of family harmony. But something made me hesitate. That would be nice, I heard myself saying. I'd enjoy having everyone here. Wonderful, Claire exclaimed, seeming genuinely pleased. I'll coordinate with everyone. Patsy can bring her sweet potato casserole. I'll handle the turkey and stuffing. We'll make it just like when Dad was alive. After we hung up, I wondered at my own decision. Why had I agreed? Perhaps because despite everything, I still hungered for connection with my family. Or perhaps because some part of me hoped that a holiday gathering might somehow bridge the growing chasm between us. Or perhaps, I admitted to myself, it was a test. One final opportunity to see who my family really was, what they truly valued. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving passed. Quickly. Claire took charge of the arrangements with her usual efficiency, assigning dishes and arrival times with the precision of a military operation. Patsy called to confirm her sweet potato casserole, making no mention of conservatorships or legal challenges. Colton and Beatrice would bring wine and appetizers. Beau was flying in from Arizona with his new girlfriend. Even Annabelle promised to attend, though she declined to contribute any food, citing her busy schedule. Austin offered to come early to help with preparations. I can handle the pies, he volunteered. Grandpa always said my apple pie was almost as good as yours. The day before Thanksgiving, I spent hours cleaning the house, despite my arthritic hands protesting the work. I wanted everything to be perfect. The good china laid out, Buck's favorite Thanksgiving decorations arranged on the mantel, fresh flowers on the table. Not to impress anyone, but because these traditions mattered to me, because maintaining them was a way of honoring Buck's memory and the family we had built together. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold. Austin arrived at 8, as promised, carrying bags of apples and pie crust ingredients. We worked together in companionable silence, the kitchen filling with the scent of cinnamon and butter. "Are you nervous about today?" he asked as he crimped the edges of a pie crust with careful fingers. I considered the question. Not nervous exactly. Realistic, perhaps. I don't expect miracles, but I hope for civility, at least. Austin nodded, understanding as always. Whatever happens, I'm here. By noon, the house was filled with delicious aromas, turkey roasting, potatoes boiling, pies cooling on the counter. Austin had set the table beautifully, using Buck's old place cards that I'd saved for decades, carefully lettering each family member's name. Claire and her husband arrived first, precisely at 2:00, carrying covered dishes and a bottle of wine. "Mom, the house looks gorgeous," Claire exclaimed, kissing my cheek. "Just like the old days." Patsy and her husband followed shortly after, then Beau with his girlfriend, a woman half his age who seemed more interested in her phone than in meeting. Her boyfriend's family. Colton and Beatrice arrived fashionably late, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and a small box of gourmet chocolates. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma," Colton said, hugging me with what seemed like genuine warmth. "The place looks amazing." Annabelle was the last to arrive, rushing in nearly an hour late with no contribution and a ready excuse. "Traffic was insane," she declared, though she lived less than 20 minutes away. Did I miss anything? With everyone assembled, we gathered. Around the table, the first complete family gathering since the confrontation months earlier. Looking at their faces, my children, their spouses, my grandchildren, I felt a complex mixture of love, wariness, and hope. "Before we eat," I said, as everyone settled into their places, "I'd like to say something." All eyes turned to me, some wary, some curious. Despite our difficulties this year, I'm grateful to have you all here today. Family is precious, even when it's complicated. I hope this meal can be a step toward healing the rifts between us, toward building relationships based on genuine care and respect. A murmur of agreement circled the table. Claire squeezed my hand. Patsy nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Now," I smiled, "let's eat before everything gets cold." The Thanksgiving meal progressed with an outward appearance of harmony that almost, but not quite, masked the underlying tensions. Conversation flowed surprisingly well, guided largely by Claire's diplomatic skill at introducing safe topics and deftly steering away from potential minefields. We discussed the unusually mild autumn, Beau's new position at his company in Arizona, and Colton's recent golf tournament win. Beatrice shared details about a charity event she was organizing, while Annabelle talked at length about her latest entrepreneurial idea: a subscription box service for pet owners that somehow involved aromatherapy for animals. Looking around, the table, at the faces of the family I'd built with Buck over decades, I felt a tug of nostalgic longing. There had been a time when gatherings like this were genuine celebrations, filled with laughter and warmth, not performative displays of family unity. As dessert was served, Austin's apple pies alongside a store-bought pumpkin that Beatrice had hastily removed from its packaging and transferred to one of my plates, Beau raised his glass. "A toast," he announced, "to Mom, for bringing us all together again." Glasses were raised, smiles were directed my way, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps something had shifted, that beneath the performance there might be a kernel of authentic reconnection. That hope dimmed when Colton, helping himself to a second slice of pie, casually mentioned the lakefront property next to our cabin. Did you hear the Morrisons are selling? He asked, his tone deliberately casual. Nearly 3 acres with 200 feet of shoreline, listing at $1.2 million. The real estate market up there is absolutely booming. I noticed the quick glance he exchanged with Beatrice, the calculation barely hidden beneath his casual observation. Is that so? I replied evenly. The Morrisons have been there even longer than we have. I'm sorry to hear they're leaving. Apparently their children aren't interested in maintaining a vacation property, Colton continued, his eyes never quite meeting mine. Too much work, too much expense. They're looking at condos in Florida instead. The implication hung in the air, awkward and unmistakable. I saw Austin's jaw tighten slightly as he refilled water glasses around the table. Claire, sensing danger, quickly changed the subject to her gallery's upcoming holiday exhibition. The moment passed, but something had shifted in me. Colton's transparent attempt to plant the idea of selling, his inability to simply enjoy a family meal without circling back to property values and potential profits. It crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated even to myself. After dessert, while the others moved to the living room for coffee, I slipped away to my bedroom, ostensibly to rest for a few minutes. Standing before the mirror on my dresser, I studied my reflection. The silver hair I'd stopped coloring years ago, the lines that mapped a lifetime of expressions, the slight stoop that had gradually altered my once straight posture. When had I started seeing myself through my children's eyes? When had I begun to accept their definition of me as an elderly woman, whose primary value lay in what she could provide to others? When had I surrendered my own desires to their expectations? On the dresser sat a small jewelry box Buck had given me on our 40th anniversary. Inside was a travel brochure I'd kept for years. Pictures of the Amalfi Coast, with its steep cliffs and colorful villages tumbling down to azure waters. Buck and I had always talked about going, had even set aside money for the trip, but he'd fallen ill before we could make it happen. After his death, I'd tucked away not just the brochure, but the dream itself, assuming that part of my life, the part involving dreams and adventures, was over. Why had I accepted that? Why had I allowed myself to become small, confined to the roles of mother and grandmother, defined by what I could give rather than what I might still become? A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Austin stood in the doorway, concern evident on his face. Everything okay, Grandma? You've been gone a while. I'm fine, I assured him, tucking the brochure back into its box. Just needed a moment of quiet. Austin nodded, understanding as always. They're starting to talk about leaving. Claire's organizing the leftovers. Of course she is, I smiled, rising to return to my guests. As predicted, the family was preparing their departures when I returned to the living room. Hugs were exchanged, promises to do this again soon were made, leftovers were distributed in containers Claire had thoughtfully brought with her. Within half an hour, only Austin remained, helping me load the dishwasher and return the dining. Room to order. That went better than I expected, he offered as he wrapped the remaining pie for me to keep. Yes and no, I replied. Did you hear Colton's comments about the Morrison property? Austin's expression darkened slightly. Hard to miss, subtle as a sledgehammer. Indeed. I folded the tablecloth with careful hands, smoothing out the creases. Austin, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about traveling? Seeing places you've never been? He looked surprised by the change of subject. Sometimes. I'd love to visit the Galapagos Islands someday, or Japan. Why do you ask? I walked to the sideboard where decades ago Buck had installed a small cabinet for liquor. Opening it, I retrieved a bottle of his favorite scotch and 2 glasses. Would you join me in a nightcap? Your grandfather's tradition after big family gatherings. Austin smiled, accepting the glass I offered. To Grandpa, he said, raising it slightly. To Buck, I echoed, taking a small sip and feeling the pleasant burn. Austin, when Buck was diagnosed, we had plans, travel plans, places we wanted to see together. The Amalfi Coast in Italy was at the top of our list. Austin nodded, listening intently. After he died, I put those dreams away. It seemed inappropriate somehow. Selfish. Like at my age, I should focus on being available to my family, not pursuing my own desires. That's ridiculous, Austin said quietly but firmly. Why shouldn't you travel? See the places you've always wanted to. See? Because that's not what grandmothers do, I replied, voicing the unspoken assumption that had governed too many of my choices. They stay home. They bake cookies. They babysit. They don't go gallivanting around Europe at 76. Austin's expression was somewhere between amused and indignant. Says who? Grandma, you're not exactly frail. You're in good health. You have the means. Why shouldn't you go to Italy if that's what you want? Why indeed? The question resonated through me, challenging years of self-imposed limitations. Perhaps I should, I said, the idea taking root even as I spoke it aloud. Perhaps it's time to revisit some of those dreams Buck and I shared. Austin's face lit up. I think that's a fantastic idea. When would you go? Spring, maybe, when it's not too hot or crowded. Spring would be lovely, I agreed, the possibility becoming more real by the moment. I'd need to do some research, find out about tours for seniors, or I could help with that, Austin offered immediately. I'm pretty good at travel planning. I looked at my grandson, this thoughtful young man who had somehow inherited Buck's kind heart and steady presence, and felt a surge of affection. Would you consider coming with me? I'd pay for your ticket, of course. It might be nice to have company, and Buck always said you had his same sense of adventure. Austin's surprise was evident. Me? Go to Italy with you? I'd love to. But are you sure? What about your other grandchildren? They might feel— Let them feel however they feel, I interrupted, a new resolve strengthening my voice. I'm done making decisions based on managing others' resentments or expectations. You're the one who's been present, who's shown genuine care. You're the one I'd enjoy traveling with. Austin's smile was answer enough. That night, after Austin had gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. With fingers that felt suddenly more nimble than they had in years, I began to search for information about traveling to the Amalfi Coast. I found myself getting lost in images of Positano and Ravello, in descriptions of lemon groves and ancient pathways, in the possibilities that had lain dormant for so long. Something was awakening in me, not just the specific desire to see Italy, but a broader reclamation of self. The woman who had dreams beyond family obligations, who had interests and passions of her own, who wasn't defined solely by what she could give to others. That woman hadn't disappeared. She had merely been in hibernation, waiting for permission to reemerge. Oh, Buck, I whispered to the quiet room. I think I'm finally ready to live again. Really live, not just exist for everyone else. The house creaked in response, a familiar settling sound that I chose to interpret as approval. Before going to bed, I wrote an email to a travel agent whose information I'd found online, inquiring about tours of the Amalfi Coast suitable for a senior traveler and her grandson in the spring. As I clicked send, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the flutter of anticipation, the quiet joy of having something wonderful to look forward to. For the first time since Buck's death, I went to sleep not with resignation about what the next day would bring, but with excitement about what the future might hold. December brought a dusting of snow and a flurry of activity. After that initial email to the travel agent, I found myself immersed in planning for our Italian adventure. The agent, a wonderfully efficient woman named Margot, had responded with several options specifically designed for active seniors, a phrase I found I rather liked. Active, not elderly, not fragile, but a person still engaged with life, still capable of experiencing new things. Austin and I settled on a 2-week trip in April, when the crowds would be manageable, but the weather pleasant. We would spend time in Naples, Sorrento, Positano, and Ravello, with day trips to Capri and Pompeii. I splurged on hotels with sea views, remembering how Buck had always said, "If you're going to see the ocean, you should wake up to it." The process of planning, researching sites to visit, learning a few basic Italian phrases, reading about the region's history, awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. My mind felt sharper, more engaged. I found myself staying up late reading travel guides, making notes about particular restaurants or museums I wanted to visit, even watching Italian films to accustom my ear to the language. When Austin came, for Sunday dinner in mid-December, I showed him the itinerary Margot had prepared. His enthusiasm matched my own as we pored over the details. "Have you told the rest of the family about the trip?" he asked as we cleared the dinner dishes. "Not yet," I admitted. "I've been waiting for the right moment." In truth, I'd been avoiding it. The family's tentative peace following Thanksgiving felt fragile, and I was reluctant to introduce anything that might disrupt it. Claire had called twice a week since then, Patsy had invited me to another lunch, and even Colton had stopped by briefly to drop off a poinsettia plant just because. These gestures were small, but seemed less calculated than before, as if perhaps the Thanksgiving gathering had nudged us toward a more genuine reconciliation. I wasn't naive enough to believe everything had been resolved, but I cherished the relative calm, knowing how quickly it could dissolve into tension and resentment. "You should tell them soon," Austin advised. "Maybe before Christmas? That way it's not a surprise when we're suddenly gone in April." He was right, of course. This wasn't something I could or should hide. Yet I found myself strangely protective of our plans, reluctant to subject them to family scrutiny or, worse, to have them become another point of contention. "I will," I promised. "At the right time." That moment came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Claire and Patsy arrived unannounced at my doorstep, their expressions a mixture of concern and determination that immediately put me on alert. "Mom," Claire began once we were settled in the living room, "we need to talk." "I gathered as much from this surprise visit," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "What's on your mind?" The sisters exchanged a glance before Patsy spoke. "We've been thinking a lot about your living situation." "My living situation?" I repeated, puzzled. "Yes," Claire continued, her voice taking on the gentle, patronizing tone she often used when discussing difficult topics. "This house is so big for just one person. All those stairs, the yard to maintain. It must be exhausting for you." "And honestly, Mom," Patsy added, "it's not really safe. What if you fell and couldn't reach the phone? What if there was a break-in? You're all alone here." I studied my daughter's faces, trying to discern their true motivation. "I've lived here for 50 years, I reminded them. "I'm not having trouble managing, and I have a security system Buck installed before he passed." "We know," Claire soothed. "But things change. You're not as young as you used to be." "Few of us are," I observed dryly. "The thing is," Patsy pressed on, "we've found a wonderful solution. There's a new senior living community opening just 15 minutes from my house. Horizon Gardens. It's really lovely. Private apartments, but with communal dining, activities, transportation. Most importantly, there's staff available 24/7 if you need help." "I see," I said carefully. "And you're suggesting I sell my home and move there?" "We've already put down a deposit to hold a unit," Claire admitted. "They're filling up fast, and we wanted to make sure you got one of the nicer apartments. 1 bedroom with a small den and a balcony overlooking the garden." The presumption was so breathtaking I found myself momentarily speechless. They had made this decision without consulting me, had put down money assuming I would simply acquiesce to their plans for my life. That was Premature, I said finally, keeping my voice steady with effort. Mom, we're just trying to help, Patsy insisted. You can't stay in this big house forever. It's not practical. Perhaps not forever, I conceded, but certainly for the foreseeable future. I'm quite content here, and perfectly capable of managing. But the maintenance, Claire pressed. The cleaning, the yard work, it's too much. I have a service that handles the heavy cleaning and yard work, I reminded her. Buck set that up years ago. As for the rest, I find that keeping my own home gives me purpose and satisfaction. But at Horizon Gardens, you wouldn't have to worry about any of that, Patsy argued. You could focus on relaxing, on enjoying your retirement. I thought about the weeks I'd just spent immersed in travel planning, the joy I'd found in learning. About Italy, the anticipation building for our April adventure. That was how I wanted to enjoy my retirement, not being shuffled into a facility where my days would be structured around communal meals and organized activities, however well-intentioned. I appreciate your concern, I said, choosing my words. Carefully, but I'm not interested in Horizon Gardens or any other senior living facility at this time. I'm happy in my home, and I intend to stay here. Claire's expression shifted from concern to frustration. Mom, be reasonable. We're thinking about your safety, your quality of life. Are you? I asked quietly. Or are you thinking about the value of this house and property? About what would happen to those assets if I moved into a facility? Patsy's face flushed. That's not fair. This isn't about money. Isn't it? I pressed. Because from where I sit, this feels remarkably similar to Colton's attempt to get me to sign over the lake house. Different approach, same objective, moving me out of properties that have significant value. That's not true, Claire insisted, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. We're worried about you, that's all. Then respect my decision, I said, firmly. I'm staying in my home, and in fact, I have plans for the spring that would make moving particularly inconvenient. Plans? Patsy asked, suspicion evident in her tone. What kind of plans? I hadn't intended to reveal our trip this way, but the moment had presented itself. Austin and I are traveling to Italy in April, 2 weeks along the Amalfi Coast. The stunned silence that followed was almost comical. Finally, Claire found her voice. Italy? With Austin? Mom, you can't be serious. I'm entirely serious, I replied. The tickets are purchased, the hotel's booked, we leave April 15th. But travel at your age? To Europe? It's so far, so exhausting. And what if something happens? What if you fall ill? Patsy's objections tumbled out rapidly. I'm in excellent health, as my doctor confirmed just last month. I've purchased comprehensive travel insurance, and I'll have Austin with me. Of course Austin is involved, Patsy muttered. I should have known. Yes, Austin is involved because he shares my interest in travel and because he's been a consistent, caring presence in my life, I stated plainly. He's not engineering anything, if that's what you're implying. In fact, I invited him. Claire looked genuinely concerned now. Mom, please think about this. International travel is challenging even for young people. The flights, the jet lag, navigating unfamiliar places. Wouldn't you rather do something easier? Maybe a cruise? Or visit Bo in Arizona? I've thought about it very carefully, I assured her. This trip to Italy was something your father and I always planned to do together. After he died, I put that dream aside, assuming my traveling days were over. But they're not. I'm still here, still capable, still curious about the world. I want to see the Amalfi Coast while I can truly enjoy it, not wait until I genuinely am too frail to go. My daughters exchanged another glance, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Claire sighed. We can see your mind is made up. Just promise you'll be careful? And maybe reconsider Horizon Gardens when you return. I'll be careful, I promised, leaving the second request unanswered. After they left, I sat in Buck's chair on the porch, despite the December chill, and considered what had just transpired. Their attempt to move me into a senior facility had been presumptuous, even manipulative, yet I couldn't entirely dismiss the concern that had partly motivated it. They weren't wrong that living alone at my age carried certain risks. But the alternative, they proposed, surrendering my independence, my home, the life I'd built with Buck, was unacceptable. The implied trade-off, safety for autonomy, was one I wasn't willing to make, at least not yet. As twilight settled over the garden, I made a decision. I would speak with Alden again, not just about my will, but about establishing a comprehensive plan for my future, one that protected my autonomy while addressing legitimate concerns about aging. I would make these decisions on my terms, not wait until circumstances or well-meaning family members forced my hand. This resolution, formed in the quiet of my own counsel, felt right. It was time to take control not just of my present but of my future, to make thoughtful provisions for whatever might come while fiercely guarding my right to live as I chose for as long as I was able. Buck would have approved, I thought, smiling, at the memory of his stubborn independence. "Might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb," he used to say when making unpopular but principled decisions. I was choosing the sheep, it seemed, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt not like someone's mother or grandmother, but like Annabelle, a woman with her own mind, her own desires, and her own life still very much worth living. The holidays passed in a blur of obligatory gatherings and forced cheer. Christmas dinner at Patsy's house felt strained, with undercurrents of tension beneath the festive decorations and carefully wrapped gifts. My announcement about the Italy trip had spread through the family like wildfire, generating reactions that ranged from Claire's worried disapproval to Colton's barely concealed annoyance. "Italy in April," he'd remarked during dinner, his tone deliberately casual. "That must be costing a pretty penny, Grandma." "It is," I'd replied simply. "Buck and I saved for this trip for years. I'm finally putting that money to its intended purpose." Only Austin had seemed genuinely happy for me, his gift. A beautiful, leather travel journal with my initials embossed on the cover, a silent affirmation of my choice. January brought bitter cold and an unexpected revelation. I'd been sorting through old financial documents in Buck's study, organizing papers for my upcoming meeting with Alden, when I discovered a file I didn't recognize. Inside were printouts of emails between Colton and Claire, dated just after Buck's funeral 3 years earlier. My hands trembled as I read the exchange, each word a fresh betrayal. "The lake property alone is worth at least 800 Ks in this market," Colton had written. "The main house probably 1.2 matters, plus whatever investments Grandpa had. I'm thinking we should encourage Grandma to move in with one of us now, while she's still adjusting to being alone. Once she's settled, we can suggest selling both properties to simplify her finances. With the market so hot, we could all benefit significantly." Claire's response had been more cautious but no less calculating. "Mom's not ready to sell anything yet. She's too attached to the house and the lake cabin. We need to be patient. Position this as concern for her well-being, not about the properties. Give it a year or two, then suggest a senior living arrangement as the sensible option. She trusts us. She'll eventually agree if we're persistent." I sat back in Buck's chair, the papers cold in my hands. The timeline suddenly made terrible sense. Claire's increasing suggestions over the past 2 years that the house was too much for me. Patsy's comments about the burden of maintaining 2 properties. Colton's convenient interest in the lake house just as he and Beatrice were looking at expensive homes. It hadn't been recent opportunism. It had been a long-term strategy, conceived while I was still grieving Buck, designed to separate me from my properties and capitalize on their value, all under the guise of concern for my welfare. The betrayal cut so deep it left me breathless. These were my children, my grandchildren, the people I had loved, supported, sacrificed for. And they had been coolly discussing the liquidation of my assets before Buck was even cold in his grave. I carefully replaced the emails in their folder and sat in silence as darkness fell outside the study windows. No tears came. Perhaps I had already cried them all in the month since the lake house confrontation. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me, a resolution hardening like steel in my heart. This wasn't about misunderstandings or generational differences or poor communication. This was about greed, pure and simple, a calculated plan to profit from my declining years, to strip me of my independence and my assets under the pretense of care. I picked up the phone and called Alden. "I need to see you tomorrow," I said when he answered. "There are significant changes I want to make to my will." Alden's office felt like a sanctuary, a place where professional ethics and clear-headed advice provided a steadying counterbalance to the emotional turmoil of the past 24 hours. I'd brought the folder containing Colton and Claire's emails, placing it on his desk without comment. He read them carefully, his expression darkening as he progressed through the exchange. When he finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," he said finally. "But in my line of work, I've seen this pattern too many times." "They were planning this while I was still in black for Buck," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "Calculating the value of my properties while I was learning how to live alone for the first time in 50 years. Alden nodded, grimly. Unfortunately, financial opportunism often emerges during periods of vulnerability. Family members see assets, mortality, and opportunity all at once. He looked at me directly. "What would you like to do, Annabelle?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with implications. I had spent the night considering this very point, weighing options, examining my own heart for any remaining illusions about my family's motivations. "I want to protect myself," I said simply. "From manipulation, from pressure, from having my wishes ignored or overridden." "That's precisely what we should do," he agreed. "Given these revelations and the earlier discussions about seeking a conservatorship, I think we need to create stronger safeguards." For the next 2 hours, we worked through a comprehensive plan. My will was revised again, this time with a trust structure that would make it virtually impossible to contest. I signed healthcare directives that named Austin and Alden as my medical proxies, not my children. Most significantly, I established what Alden called a lifetime protection trust that would shield my assets from being accessed by anyone other than me during my lifetime, regardless of any claims made about my competency. "This doesn't mean you can't help family members if you choose to," Alden explained as I signed the final documents. "It simply ensures that all financial decisions remain exclusively yours, unless you become genuinely incapacitated, as determined by 2 independent physicians, not family opinion." The signing of those papers marked a watershed moment, a clear delineation between my life as it had been, characterized by vulnerability to family pressure, and my life as it would be going forward, protected by legal structures that preserved my autonomy. As I left Alden's office, stepping into the crisp January air, I felt an unexpected lightness. The betrayal still hurt, perhaps would always hurt, but the steps I'd taken to protect myself had created a strange sense of liberation. No more worrying about appearing difficult or selfish for wanting to maintain control of my own life and property. No more fear that a moment of vulnerability might be exploited to separate me from my home or savings. In the car, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls, 1 each from Claire, Patsy, and Colton. Synchronicity or coordination, I wondered, no longer giving them the benefit of the doubt. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I drove to Austin's apartment, needing to share this development with the one family member I still fully trusted. He listened without interruption as I explained what I'd discovered and the steps I'd taken with Alden. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he said when I finished, genuine pain in his eyes. You deserved better from them. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But, in a strange way, I'm grateful for the clarity. No more illusions, no more second-guessing myself. I know exactly where I stand now. Austin nodded, understanding. So, what happens next? I smiled, feeling the weight of the decision I'd made overnight. I think it's time for me to live fully and unapologetically for myself, starting with our trip to Italy, and continuing however I see fit after that. I think Grandpa would approve, Austin said, squeezing my hand. I know he would, I replied, certain of at least that much in this uncertain world. Word traveled fast. By the following afternoon, my phone was ringing incessantly. Claire, Patsy, Colton, even Bo calling from Arizona. I let each call go to voicemail, not yet ready for the inevitable confrontations. Their messages grew increasingly. Urgent, moving from casual, just checking in, to concerned, we need to talk, to Claire's final, somewhat frantic, Mom, please call me back immediately. This is important. I knew what had happened. Alden had notified them, as legally required, about the changes to my estate plan. They would have learned not only about the creation of the Lifetime Protection Trust, but also about my revised medical directives naming Austin and Alden as my healthcare proxies. 3 days after my visit to Alden's office, they arrived en masse. Claire, Patsy, Colton, and Beatrice appearing on my doorstep unannounced just after breakfast. Their expressions ranged from Claire's carefully composed concern to Colton's barely concealed anger. Mom, we need to talk, Claire began once they'd settled in my living room, uninvited coffee cups in hand. We're worried about you. The sudden legal changes, Patsy added. They're so unlike you, so extreme. I regarded them calmly, my hands folded in my lap. What specifically concerns you about my estate planning decisions? The directness of my question seemed to catch them off guard. Claire recovered first. It's just that, well, these aren't the kinds of decisions you would typically make. You've always been fair, balanced, considerate of the entire family. And now you're changing everything, Colton interjected, less patient than his aunts. Cutting out your own children as healthcare proxies? Creating trusts that basically lock everyone out of helping you manage your affairs? It seems like you don't trust your own family. I met his gaze steadily. That's an interesting point about trust, Colton. Tell me, when did you and Claire first discuss selling my properties after your grandfather died? Was it before or after his funeral? The silence that fell was absolute. Claire paled visibly, while Colton's expression froze in a mask of surprise quickly replaced by calculation. I don't know what you're talking about, he attempted. But the lie fell flat. I found the emails, I said simply. The ones where you discussed the value of my home and the lake house, where you strategized about getting me to move in with one of you so you could encourage me to sell both properties. The ones where Claire suggested waiting a year or two before proposing senior living as the sensible option. Claire set her coffee cup down with a shaking hand. Mom, those emails, they weren't what they seemed. We were concerned about you living alone, about the burden of maintaining 2 properties at your age. Is that why you mentioned the properties were worth over $2 million combined? I asked, keeping my voice even. Out of concern for my welfare? This is ridiculous, Colton sputtered. You're taking things completely out of context, twisting a private conversation. A private conversation about liquidating my assets while I was still grieving for my husband, I interrupted. Let's be honest with each other at least. You saw opportunity in my vulnerability. You've been planning for years to separate me from my properties, to access their value before I died. Patsy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Mom, you're making this sound so calculated, so cold. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. What's best for me, I repeated. Like pressuring me to sign over the lake house. To Colton? Like putting a deposit on a senior living apartment without consulting me? Like discussing a conservatorship when I refused to comply with your plans? Their shocked expressions confirmed what I'd suspected. They'd had no idea I knew about the conservatorship discussions. Alden told you, Claire said flatly. Alden has always been forthright with me, yes. Unlike my own children. April arrived, with gentle showers and the promise of renewal. The confrontation with my children had been painful, but ultimately clarifying. After their failed attempt to justify the emails and downplay their intentions, our relationship had settled into a strained détente. They called occasionally, visited rarely, and when they did, conversation remained superficial, carefully avoiding any mention of property, finances, or my upcoming trip. I found, somewhat to my surprise, that I was at peace with this new reality. The illusions had been stripped away, leaving a clearer view of my family and my place within it. There was grief in that clarity, certainly, but also freedom. Freedom from expectations, from the exhausting effort of pretending all was well, when it clearly wasn't. As our departure date approached, my excitement about the Italy trip grew. I spent hours researching the places we would visit, practiced my rudimentary Italian, and carefully planned what to pack. Austin came by regularly to help with preparations, his enthusiasm matching my own. The night before our flight, I stood in my bedroom, looking at the suitcase open on my bed. Beside it lay Buck's old leather travel wallet, which I'd decided to bring along, a small piece of him to carry on this journey we'd planned to take together. "I'm doing it, Buck," I whispered, running my fingers over the worn leather. Better late than never. The journey itself was everything I'd hoped for and more. Despite Claire's dire predictions about exhaustion and jet lag, I found I managed the long flight surprisingly well. Austin's thoughtful arrangements, wheelchair assistance through the sprawling airports, aisle seats with extra legroom, carefully timed rest breaks during our transfers, made the travel far less taxing than I'd feared. And then we were there, stepping out of a taxi into the brilliant sunshine of Sorrento, the scent of lemon blossoms heavy in the air, the Mediterranean stretching blue and endless before us. Our hotel, perched on a cliff overlooking the Bay of Naples, was exactly what Buck would have chosen, elegant but not ostentatious, with a terrace where we could sip coffee in the mornings and watch the changing light on the water. "Is it everything you imagined?" Austin asked as we stood on that terrace our first evening, the sun setting in a spectacular display of orange and pink. "It's more," I replied honestly. Buck would have loved this. The days that followed took on a rhythm both adventurous and gentle. Mornings exploring charming villages with their narrow streets and colorful buildings. Afternoons resting or taking. Boat trips along the stunning coastline. Evenings savoring long, leisurely dinners, discovering the region's culinary treasures. In Positano, I found myself approached by a local artist selling watercolors from a small stall near the beach. One painting in particular caught my eye. An elderly couple walking hand in hand along a coastal path, their figures small against the grandeur of sea and cliffs. "Ah, you like this one?" the artist asked in accented English. "It is my favorite. Also, I call it Never Too Late." The title resonated so deeply that tears sprang unexpectedly to my eyes. Without hesitation, I purchased the painting, carefully rolling it to bring home. On our visit to Ravello, we discovered a small ceramic shop where an elderly craftsman created delicate, hand-painted tiles. Watching his gnarled fingers work with such precision and artistry, I felt a kinship. Age had not diminished his skill or passion for his craft. "How long have you been making these?" I asked him through Austin's halting translation. 62 years, he replied with pride. "Since I was 14, and I will continue until these hands can no longer hold the brush." His words stayed with me, a simple affirmation of continuing to do what brings joy for as long as one is able. Throughout our journey, I found myself taking dozens of photographs, not just of the spectacular scenery, but of small, meaningful moments. A cat sunning itself on ancient stone steps. an elderly woman hanging laundry outside her window, singing softly to herself. A young couple sharing a gelato, oblivious to everything but each other. Each image captured not just a scene, but a feeling, a reminder that life continues to offer beauty and discovery at every stage. Our return from Italy coincided with a spectacular spring bloom in my garden. The timing seemed symbolic somehow, as if the world were welcoming me back with an affirmation of renewal. I arranged the painting from Positano, never too late, in a place of honor in the living room where I could see it daily, a reminder of the journey and all it had come to represent. The trip had changed me, not just in the obvious ways that travel broadens one's perspective, but in deeper, more essential aspects. I moved differently now, with more confidence, more purpose. The hesitation that had characterized so many of my actions in recent years had fallen away, replaced by a quiet certainty about who I was and what mattered to me. Austin noticed it immediately. "You seem different, Grandma," he observed during his first visit after our return. "More yourself, somehow." "I am more myself," I agreed. "Perhaps more myself than I've been in decades." My newfound clarity extended to my relationships as well. When Claire called, tentatively suggesting a family dinner to welcome you home and hear about your trip, I agreed without hesitation. Not from any expectation that fundamental relationships would change, but from the secure knowledge that I could engage with my family on my own terms, without fear or need for approval. The gathering was stilted at first, with carefully polite inquiries about our travels. I answered candidly, sharing stories of the breathtaking coastline, the delicious food, the fascinating people we'd met. I showed photographs of Austin and me on a boat to Capri, of the ceramic craftsmen in Ravello, of the stunning views from our hotel terraces. What I didn't share was the deeper significance of the journey, how it had represented not just a trip I'd long wanted to take, but a reclamation of my own life and agency. Those revelations felt too personal, too precious to offer up to family members who had demonstrated they might not honor them. As the evening progressed, I noticed subtle shifts in the family dynamics. Colton was quieter than usual, his customary confidence dimmed by the tangible evidence that I was living my life without regard to his expectations or approval. Patsy seemed genuinely interested in the stories of Italian artisans and their crafts, perhaps recognizing something familiar in their dedication to creating beauty. Claire watched me with a puzzled expression, as if seeing a version of her mother she didn't quite recognize. Only Austin seemed completely at ease, occasionally adding his own observations about our adventures, but mostly allowing me to take center stage, a role I realized I had rarely claimed in family gatherings. After they departed, I sat alone in Buck's chair on the porch, watching fireflies begin to emerge in the garden dusk. The evening had confirmed what I'd already sensed. The family's perception of me had shifted, perhaps irrevocably. I was no longer the predictable, accommodating grandmother whose primary value lay in what she could provide. I had become something less convenient but more authentic, a woman with her own desires, boundaries, and capacity for unexpected actions. Whether they would ultimately adjust to this new reality remained to be seen. But I found, somewhat to my surprise, that their adjustment was no longer my primary concern. 3 days later, I received a letter from Alden. Inside was a sealed envelope with a note. "Per your instructions, to be delivered upon your return. From Italy." With a start, I recognized Buck's handwriting on the envelope. A message from my husband, held in trust by our lawyer until this moment. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "My dearest Annabelle, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I've left this world ahead of you, and you've finally taken that trip to Italy we planned for so long. Good for you, my love. I always knew you would find your way there eventually, with or without me. There's something I never told you, something I asked Alden to keep in confidence until the right moment. I've always known our children better than you have. seen the eye. Calculations behind their affection, the expectations beneath their concern. I loved them deeply, but I harbored no illusions about who they were or what motivated them. I set aside a separate fund for you, money they don't know about, that isn't part of our visible estate. Enough for you to live as you choose, to travel. More, if that's what you desire, to be free from any financial dependence that might give them leverage over your choices. Use it well, Annie. Live fully. Remember that I loved you not for what you gave to others, but for who you are. Stubborn and kind, practical and dreaming, always more capable than you believed yourself to be. All my love. Always, Buck. The letter blurred through my tears. Not tears of sadness, but of profound recognition. Buck had seen clearly what I had only gradually come to understand. That true love empowers rather than constrains. That it recognizes the beloved's full selfhood rather than defining them by their utility or service. The Italy trip hadn't been just a journey across an ocean, but a crossing from one way of being to another, from a life constrained by others' expectations to one defined by my own choices and values. What I wrote in my will had indeed made them regret their calculations and manipulations, but the true transformation had been my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.